The artifacts I found in Dwarka were not just fiction, and I wasn't just finding this stuff randomly. I knew I had to go deeper. Why? Because there's an ancient text called the Mahabharata, describing a beautiful city called Dwarka. This ancient text also mentions that Dwarka was built by Krishna and was eventually devoured by the sea, making it a lost underwater kingdom. And so here I was in that exact city, that exact lost kingdom, looking for more information, but no one could help me? Well, the Mahabharata is one of the major Sanskrit epics of ancient India and is actually the longest one as well. There have been many attempts to unravel its history and compositional layers. It is a very complex text consisting of 18 books. These books describe a war between the Pandavas, led by Krishna, and the evil Kauravas, in which 4 million soldiers are said to have died in 18 days. Now, did Krishna really exist during this time? Could such a war have taken place so long ago? Was Dwarka a real city where this war took place? Well, prior to coming on this trip, I discovered that the most significant supporting evidence of this war, evidence of Dwarka, evidence of ancient technology, and evidence of Krishna's existence actually came from astronomical references, which were discovered by Dr. Narahari Achar, a professor of physics at the University of Memphis, who is the world's foremost researcher of the astronomical events described in the ancient texts. Traditionally, Indians have believed that the war took place about 3000 BC, but modern scholars who have a more critical approach to the study of the epics take a different view. Professor Achar said that there are many types of astrological events referred to in these ancient texts, consisting of eclipses and comets and conjunctions of planets with different stars. The most intriguing part of these astrological events is the appearance of 2 fiery comets. Professor Achar identified in the Mahabharata that there were 2 comets with blazing coppery red heads. These 2 comets were mentioned in not just one book, but 2 of the books of the Mahabharata, namely the Udyoga and the Bhishma Parvas. In conjunction with these comets, he noted that the texts also mention that Saturn was at Aldebaran, and that Mars performed a retrograde motion near Antares. Professor Achar then used several different pieces of astronomy software to determine the date in the Mahabharata and the existence of Dwarka. These pieces of software enabled him to view the night sky as if it would have appeared any time in the past, and so he painstakingly reproduced the exact night sky for every single reference in the Mahabharata. a lunar eclipse occurred in the month of Kartika and took place at Pleiades, which is located in the constellation of Taurus. After this occurs, the Mahabharata mentions that it is followed by a solar eclipse near Antares. Dr. Achar took this evidence and searched for the years 3500 BC to about 500 AD and found there are 137 such conjunctions where Saturn is at Aldebaran. When we see Saturn's transit at Aldebaran, it's usually an event which is even today considered by Indian astrologers to be associated with great wars and violent events. One recent event where the transit of Saturn at Aldebaran was in 2001, the year that the Twin Towers fell. Saturn's retrogression eerily predicted the exact month too, September. Dr. Achar then searched for years in which Mars performed a retrograde motion near Antares. It turns out that this reduces the dates from 137 to just 17. After narrowing this down to just 17 dates, he looked for years where there was a lunar eclipse in the month of Kartika, and this reduced the set from 17 to just 2. These 2 years identified by Professor Achar were 2183 BC and 3067 BC. One last final piece of conclusive evidence solved this puzzle. In 2183 BC, the winter solstice occurred in the waning phase of the moon. In 3067 BC, it occurred in the waxing phase, and the waxing phase is exactly what was written in the Mahabharata and what Dr. Achar was looking for. A careful study of these ancient scriptures yields data about a third eclipse in October of 3067 BC, which follows the solar eclipse at an interval of 13 days, exactly how the epic describes it. The evidence presented by Professor Achar overwhelmingly pinpoints 3067 BC as the year when the great battle described in the ancient texts of the Mahabharata took place. Because the astronomical dates and the events described in the Mahabharata have been authenticated by modern scientific method, it is reasonable to conclude that the Mahabharata itself is a factual description of events that took place during that time. As I dug in more, I found references to Dwarka and references to flying machines, or what are commonly referred to as Vimanas in the ancient text. I discovered there are 41 places in the Mahabharata where they mention Vimanas. Of the 41 mentions of these flying machines, there is one particular interest that deserves special attention, in which there was an air attack by King Salva on Krishna's capital of Dwarka. It was written that King Salva had an aerial flying machine known as a Sobhapura, in which he came to attack Dwarka. Details of this can be found in the ancient Sanskrit text called the Bhagavata Purana.
In the Bhagavat Purana, which is sometimes called the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a description of a Vimana made of metal that was used by the king Shalva to attack the city of Dwarka, which was Lord Krishna's city. There's still a city of that name in the Gujarat state of India, in northwestern India. In ancient times, it was the capital of Lord Krishna, who was, you could say, the head of the forces of good in the universe. This King Shalva was opposed to Lord Krishna, and he wanted a weapon that he could use to attack the city of Dwarka.
Delighted with his new wonderful and powerful airship, the wicked King Salva gathers his army and heads for the city of Dwarka to battle with Krishna. From his excellent Vimana, he threw down a torrent of projectiles. A fierce vortex arose and blanketed the entire area with billowing dust. Then Lord Krishna suddenly appears in his shining chariot to confront King Salva in battle. When Salva saw Krishna's chariot on the battlefield, he thereupon released a great and powerful weapon, which flew through the sky with a roaring sound like a great meteor. The text describes it as being so bright that it literally lit up the night sky. Now, this sounds a lot like a blazing rocket, And as Krishna began his counterattack, Salva engages the special powers of his Vimana in an all-out effort to avoid destruction. He began to shower missiles from the sky. Krishna at last threw a powerful ground-to-air weapon which hit the plane in the middle and broke it into pieces. The damaged flying machine fell into the seas of Dwarka.
This Vimana was used to attack the city of Dwarka. In the end, Lord Krishna shot it down and it crashed into the ocean off the coast of Dwarka. So that's an example of a Vimana made of metal. And it had a very unusual flight pattern. It said it could appear several places at once and then come together in one form again. So it appears to have had an ability that modern militaries are developing, the ability to fool the defense forces of a country into thinking that there are many different attacking aircraft when in fact there's only one, and this will confuse, say, the radar detection systems.
So yesterday I went over to the island of Bet Dwarka, and everyone there, all the locals, all the tribes, everyone just said, we don't really know, anything about the excavations or where to find any of the information, and there's not much on the internet. So it was a bit of a disappointment yesterday. Although I got a lead from someone, one person over there on the island said, go to the mainland and go to the ASI office, which is the Archaeological Survey of India. Now, this organization was one of the lead government agencies that helped drive the initial exploration and expedition and excavations that were going on in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so all we had was a last name and a general location. So after about 20 minutes of walking or so, we actually found this guy and we found the location of where he was. This man is actually very interesting. He told me that a lot of the stuff that was originally done here is not located here anymore. We actually have to go to a place that's 10 hours away, and I'm actually taking a car there tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the morning, sitting in the car for 10 hours, and I'm going to the main office in Vadodara. The man at ASI also said that S.R. Rao. S.R. Rao is the original man who led the excavations here in the 80s. And he discovered tons of stuff, brought all this stuff to the press, wrote books about it. And, he said that this is the lost kingdom. This is the lost kingdom of, Lord Krishna. He was saying that he was a real person. This is proof that, the stories that we hear about this man or this god or whatever you want to call it, this hero, is actually true. ASI, I asked the guy, I said, why did everything stop? If this is true, why wouldn't you excavate more and get as much information as you can? If you found stuff that predates 5,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago, even some things that were 30,000 years ago, why wouldn't you want to investigate more? And he says, everyone just quit. So this was interesting to me, and so I asked him, was it a budget issue? And he says, no, there's plenty of money for this project. Everyone just quit. No one had any more interest in it because there wasn't any interest for it. And here's something even more interesting. The man that took over after S.R. Rao mysteriously disappeared, he vanished as well. Now, how can two people and a whole team of 30 people just go away and this whole project comes to a halt? So I said, this is getting even more interesting. Did he find something that they don't want to tell people? Is there some kind of cover-up here? Is there some kind of conspiracy? What actually happened? So here I am in Vadodara. It took about 10 hours to get here, long journey. And so today in the morning, I went over to ASI, which is the head office that I was told to come to. So after going to the office, took about an hour before the guy actually saw me. Turns out he's a really, really nice guy. And so I'm actually gonna go see him tomorrow and have another meeting with him. I'm gonna start actually pry information out of him about the whole exploration and why it stopped and where this man disappeared to and what's actually going on over there.
On March 26th, the day after my 11-hour journey by car, I met with Dr. K.C. Noriel, the superintending archaeologist and director of the Archaeological Survey of India. He was a bit standoffish at first, but then I explained to him that I'm doing this for non-profit and I wanted to interview him to help spread the knowledge that the world needs to know. Dr. Noriel sort of lit up when I said that, and he brought up 2 other excavation points that he wants me to be involved in. It was cool stuff, but still evading the subject at hand. I asked if he could go on camera for an interview today regarding the submerged kingdom and civilization of Dwarka, and he said that he had to go to a meeting, and we could talk tomorrow after he gets his papers together. So I scheduled a meeting with him for tomorrow at 1 p.m. After Dr. Noriel told me that he needed to get his stuff together, I left and went to go look for someone else to get more information. I was tired of getting the runaround. That's when I looked up a local university that was involved in the excavations, and I found a school called MS University. At the local university, I went around asking for the head of the archaeology and the ancient history department. The archaeology and the ancient history department helped out with the excavations in the past, so I figured they would be perfect to answer some of my questions. After about 30 minutes of roaming the university, I finally found the office. Dr. K. Krishnan was his name, and he was the head of the Department of Archaeology and Ancient History. I was told by his assistant that he was at a meeting. She also told me which meeting he went to, and this wasn't just any meeting. He was at the same meeting as Dr. Noriel, the guy who I just met with at ASI. Whoa! Now this was starting to get weird. These 2 guys were in the same meeting? Well, I can't wait for my appointment tomorrow with Dr. Noriel. This is going to be epic.
So I am here in the state of Gujarat, a city called Vadodara, and I am here at the Archaeological Survey of India, or ASI for short. I've set up a meeting here with Dr. Noriel, and he is a doctor in archaeology and has been studying India for quite some time, especially the state of Gujarat. The history of Dwarka was known as the ancient city of Lord Krishna. You know, there's a lot of controversy as well around whether it was actually the city of Lord Krishna or not.
So from archaeological perspective, there is no doubt that Dwarka was a city, and once upon a time a very flourishing city which was enjoying Arab-India trade. But to relate them with a particular city of a particular time period is a moot point, and right now debatable point, and their argument sound convincing. Yes, this was once upon a time a flourishing port city on the west coast of India.
Okay. Any particular reason why they stopped the excavation, or what is the reason?
No, I think no. Whenever we undertake any excavation project, we have set goals, aims and objectives.
But if we had found something from so long ago, then why not find more? Is it funding mostly? Or
No, we don't have any problem of funds. But as I said that we have academic goals, academic questions, research questions. So once we have realized we don't see any point in going further unless more research questions are framed, and then we plan to find answers to them.
Okay. One more question. In the ancient scriptures, they talk about using vimanas.
Vimanas.
Vimanas, yes. Which are basically saying flying chariots.
You see, one can build up n number of theories, but then the central issue is how to substantiate that. What are the conclusive proof to support that? So this is, as far as I understand, maybe a fig of imagination.
Now let's go back to the scientific literature. In the year 1862, a scientific journal called The Geologist published a report that a complete human skeleton had been found 90 feet below the surface of the ground, that's about 30 meters, in Macoupin County, Illinois. And directly above this skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock that extended for hundreds of yards in all directions, completely sealing the skeleton off from the surface. And so that sort of rules out the intrusive burial hypothesis in this case. And geologists told us that this layer here where the skeleton was found is again about 300 million years old, the same age as the gold chain found in the same state. This interesting report from Scientific American tells of a beautiful metallic vase that was found solidly embedded in layers of rock about 600 million years old. Now, the oldest artifacts that I encountered in my research were some round metallic objects that have been found over the past 30 years or so by miners in South Africa at a place called Ottosdalen in the western Transvaal region. And these artifacts are small. They're 1 or 2 inches in diameter. They're not huge like this. The interesting feature about them is the parallel grooves that go around the center of each object. This one has 3. Some have 4 grooves, some have 2. The objects are made of a naturally occurring type of iron called hematite. Hematite is still used by tribal people in Africa even today as a kind of semi-precious stone. What's interesting about these artifacts is they're found solidly embedded in mineral deposits over 2 billion years old. Now I could go on and on about these discoveries because there are hundreds of them, but I'm not going to do that. I'll just ask you to remember one thing about this topic. Generally, scientists say all the physical evidence supports this evolutionary picture of human origins, with humans like us coming into existence about 100,000 years ago. I think it's not true that all of the physical evidence supports that idea. When we actually look at everything that the archaeologists have found, we see a continuous chain of discoveries going all the way back to 2 billion years ago. And personally, I find that interesting. It's an interesting coincidence, you might say, that's exactly what we should expect to be finding if what these ancient Sanskrit writings are telling us about human origins is true. But even so, this evidence that we reported in Forbidden Archaeology, it really doesn't tell us so much about human origins. It tells us about human antiquity. It tells us that humans have coexisted on this planet with various types of apes and ape men for vast periods of time, but it really doesn't answer the question, where did we come from? How did we get here? And that leads into the next topic. I want to give you a little preview of what's coming out in my book, Human Devolution, which will be released in America in September. What I say in that book is that before we ask the question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? Now today, most scientists will start with the assumption that a human being is simply a combination of the ordinary physical elements, carbon and hydrogen and iron and calcium and phosphorus. But that sort of limits the kinds of explanations that we can give. So what I want to do is to broaden the explanatory possibilities. And I would say that it's more reasonable, on the basis of all the scientific evidence that's available today, to start with the assumption that a human being is composed not of just one thing, ordinary matter, but of three things: matter, mind, and consciousness or spirit. And the ordinary matter we really don't have to talk about. Everyone accepts that. This mind element, I think there's evidence for a mind element associated with the human organism. This evidence would come from the various types of psychical and paranormal research into extrasensory perception and things like that. As far as the existence of a conscious self that can exist apart from the body and apart from the mind, that would come from fields such as out-of-body experience research, near-death experience research, and past life memory research. But again, just as in the case of the stones and the bones, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge filtration that's gone on in these areas, and that's one thing I'm going to expose in my book, Human Devolution. But basically, once we accept this idea that we're a combination of consciousness, mind, and matter, then we have to explain how all these things came together. And basically what I want to say is we didn't evolve up from matter, we came down from the level of pure consciousness, or devolved. But really what I've found is that people, they tend to want very simple explanations. Either they want a very simple creation account, where God instantaneously creates everything, or they want a very simple Darwinian evolutionary account where the chemicals come together and they just turn magically into human beings completely by random genetic mutations, or they want some very simple extraterrestrial account where the space aliens come and create human beings in some very simple way on this planet. I think the actual story is much more complicated. I think it involves all three of these things. I think it does involve some kind of cosmic intelligence guiding and initiating the process. I think it also does involve a kind of evolution. By evolution, we generally mean a process of reproduction with modification. Things reproduce, they modify in the course of reproduction. But I think the Darwinists had it wrong. They had it upside down. I think there is a process of reproduction with modification that goes on, but it starts with the most intelligent and complicated beings, and it works itself down to the other types of beings. It's also a process that goes not from the gross to the more subtle, but from the subtle to the gross. That's why I call it devolution. There is a reproductive process involved. It does involve the reproductive activities of what we might call extra-dimensional beings, gods and goddesses, as they're sometimes called. So there is a process of something what we might call like cosmic controlled breeding, intelligently guided genetic modification. And there actually is an extraterrestrial element to it as well. The ancient Sanskrit writings, for example, speak of 400,000 human species scattered throughout the universe, and they communicate with each other sometimes by different types of spacecraft or extra-dimensional, intradimensional craft, which they call vimanas. So I think it's the actual story of human origins, which I call devolution, involves a very complicated interaction between all of these things, an overall guiding cosmic intelligence, a process of evolution, of reproduction with modification, on a cosmic level, on a universal level, with an extraterrestrial element to it. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, there's a website that will be up soon called humandevolution.com, in which you can read the introduction to that book. So that's there. Now these ideas that I've just briefly sketched out for you I think they satisfy the requirements of a good scientific explanation. What a good scientific explanation should do is it should allow you to accommodate evidence coming from many different fields of knowledge in a very natural way to explain some important question. And I think this human devolution concept does that. It allows us, for example, to accommodate all this evidence for extreme human antiquity, to allow their theory to stand. Today's scientists have to exclude, they have to artificially exclude this evidence. In other words, they have to manipulate the data set, and that's considered not a good thing for a good scientific explanation. If you have to massage the data to make it fit your theory, it's not very good. I mean, basically what a good scientific explanation should do is it should allow you to naturally accommodate, the evidence that's out there in the world. To make the current theories of human origins work, scientists have to exclude the vast amount of evidence for extraterrestrials. They have to exclude vast amounts of scientifically documented evidence for the paranormal, for the psychical, and they have to deny the evidence that's accumulated in the great wisdom traditions of the world down through history. Whereas the kind of explanation that myself and others are offering allow us to naturally accommodate this type of evidence. So now I want to move on to the third topic that I want to go over. As I have in common with many other researchers an interest in the origins of different civilizations, I'm particularly concerned with the question of the origin of Vedic civilization in India. According to the ancient Vedic writings themselves, that civilization has been there for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, whereas according to the current dominant ideas in history and archaeology, it's only been there for about 3,000 years. So last year, I attended a private meeting with Dr. Joshi, who is the science minister for the Indian national government. Other researchers also attended this meeting, including David Frawley, who some of you probably know. And at that meeting, he was talking about the discovery of an underwater city off the northwest coast of India. And this discovery was made by a team of oceanographers working for the National Institute of Ocean Technology, which is part of the science ministry of which Dr. Joshi is the head. And basically, these oceanographers had been doing side-scan sonar investigations of the coast of India in that area. And in the course of these investigations, their side-scan sonar images revealed architectural shapes. That's one example, and here's another. And from these and other sonar scan images, they made a model of what the settlement would have looked like. Now, as I said, this work was done by oceanographers who really didn't have any barriers to finding such things. Now, many archaeologists were very skeptical of this, and they said, actually, what you're seeing is probably just some natural formations on the ocean bottom. So they couldn't send down divers because the waters were too turbid and the currents were too swift. But they decided to do some dredging. And among the things that they dredged up from that area were human bones. They dredged up semi-precious stones that had been carved into the form of beads with holes drilled through the center of them. They also discovered stones with engraving on them. They also found pieces of carved wood. And they did a radiocarbon dating on one of these pieces of wood, and it came out to be 9,500 years old. Now that's really quite interesting because that would make this city, if that's what it is, older than the conventionally accepted ages for all the other civilizations in the region. As I said, I mean, you're familiar with a lot of the alternative archaeological ideas that would make these other civilizations like the Egyptian and the Sumerian and the others older. But at 9,500 years, the city, the underwater city off the Gulf of Cambay would be older than the conventionally accepted ages for these other civilizations. So the archaeologists in India and around the world are very much opposed to this idea, but the oceanographers, who don't really have any barriers, are still interested in pursuing it, so we'll have to see what happens. It'll require, this type of research. Now myself, I'm currently involved in some research at a place called Sri Rangam in southern India. It's the largest temple complex in India. It's located in the Tamil Nadu state, here in the far south eastern part of India. The temple complex is located on an island in the Kaveri River. It's surrounded by 7 walls. It's like a whole city. The main idol in the temple is a reclining form of Vishnu. And this idol, or murti, as it's called in Sanskrit, has an interesting history. The history is that it was originally worshipped on another planet called Brahmaloka. And then millions of years ago, it was brought to this planet, to the city of Ayodhya, and then it was transferred by a vimana from there to, the intention was to take it to Lanka, which is currently off the coast of India, Sri Lanka. But on the way, the vimana landed at this place where the temple now is, and it wasn't supposed to do that, because one of the conditions of moving the murti was that if it stopped anywhere, it would just stay there. So it landed in South India millions of years ago, according to the traditional accounts. And at that time, a huge temple was built to house the murti, or the idol. And over the course of time, it was covered by the river. And then about 10,000 years ago, sometime between 5,000 and 10,000 years ago, it was rediscovered, and another temple was built there. So that's the traditional history of the place. And according to, this gold structure here it's erected on the temple building directly over the place where inside the murti is. And this gold structure, interestingly enough, is called a vimana, which means spacecraft. It's interesting. Now, I have some historical documents that say that this is the 3rd boundary wall at the temple. As I said, there's 7 walls, and this is the 3rd one. And I have information from historical records that this wall was erected 5,000 years ago. Now, the archaeologists today don't accept that. They think it's far more recent. So I'm interested in doing some investigations there, and I've been able to hook up with an Indian archaeologist who's expressed a willingness to get the proper permissions from the Archaeological Survey of India and the temple authorities there at Sri Rangam to do this research. So just a couple of months ago, I was at Sri Rangam, and we were doing an initial survey because we wanted to see if there were actually any places there where we could do some excavations. In other words, we want to be sure that there were some places off the public pathways that weren't, paved over, where we could do some research. So we did find some locations where it does look like it's possible to do some excavations. And this was an even better place on the east side of that 3rd wall, where there's an isolated garden area that's completely cut off from the public. So if we get the proper permissions, which it looks like we will be able to get, then in December, I would go back there and we would do some excavations there. And my idea would be to show that the current temple is built on older foundations that go back at least 5,000 years and probably much, much further than that. So thank you for listening to these 3 topics. I have this website here if you care to look at that. I don't know, do we have more time? Okay. Okay. Okay, so thank you. We begin on the level of pure consciousness. We begin on the level of spirit. And then if we become attracted to lower energies, then that original conscious self becomes covered by these lower energies. First it becomes covered by mind and then by matter. So at our level of existence, that's what we see. As human beings, we find ourselves as conscious beings, covered with mind, covered with a body made of the ordinary physical elements. So how we got here is the process of devolution. We start on the level of pure consciousness. If we become attracted to these lower energies, then we become covered by them. But there's also a process for becoming uncovered. In other words, there's a process of re-evolution, or revolution, if you want to. In different points in the Earth's history, we may have been working with energies on a more subtle level, say more on the level of mind than on the level of the material body. And I think that a lot of our technology today is an attempt by us to duplicate abilities that we had, making use of more natural, subtle means of extrasensory perception and things like that. We may have had a natural capacity for remote viewing, and today we try to duplicate it using television, for example. And it may not be possible to understand that just in terms of one life, which brings us to the idea of transmigration of the soul, or reincarnation, where life by life we make evolutionary progress towards the goal of coming back to our original, say, spiritual condition on the level of pure consciousness. I want to build a scientific case for the assumption that a human being is composed of matter, mind, and consciousness. And that leads to the assumption that our cosmos is also divided into regions that are dominated by matter, regions that are dominated by more subtle material energies, and regions that are dominated by pure consciousness. And it also leads to the idea that there are life forms in each of these regions that are adapted to life. In these different regions, for example, there are life forms that are adapted to existence on the level of pure consciousness. There are life forms that are adapted to existing in the realm of the more subtle material energies, the astral energies, if you want to call them that. And then there are forms like ourselves that are adapted to life in the level dominated by the grosser material energies. And then we have to decide which level we would like to exist on. If we're happy with this level of existence, then we can stay here. But if not, there are ways to re-evolve to the level of pure consciousness.